We spent a fair amount of time in this class talking about indirect effects caused by things like trophic cascades. That is, when a predator, when consumers at a higher trophic level have indirect positive effects on a lower trophic level through the consumption of other consumers that are impacting this lower trophic level. This is often referred to as top-down control. The higher trophic levels at the top have an influence on the lower trophic levels below. And this was the essence of the Hairston-Smith-Slobodkin, the world is green hypothesis, that herbivores never really had a chance to overconsume their resources because consumption by higher order consumers was so intense. Well, we also spent a fair amount of time talking about the influence that that features like plant quality or plant quantity has on the abundance and consumption patterns of herbivores. This is the so-called bottom-up view of the world, where it's the amount and the quality of the resources that really determines how many herbivores could actually be there. And that plants are toxic or they're recalcitrant and so on. And this is the main effect that lower and plants are recalcitrant or defended or other ways that they can prevent consumption from actually happening. And this is what determines the abundance of consumers at this middle trophic level here. And of course, both things are actually happening. That there's a combination of top-down and bottom-up effects, and in fact, that the plants themselves could have effects on the consumers, which then in turn affect the herbivores. So this integrated approach is really the way that we see the world working right now. Well, if you believe, or if bottom-up effects can be so important, then what you might expect is that the amount of energy that's available here is critical to the herbivores that are trying to consume them. Here is a common pattern that is actually often seen in just about every food web, or here's a pattern that is typically seen in just about every food web that you look at, where when you look at the numbers of consumers at each subsequent trophic levels, where you might have things like plants here and herbivores here and predators of those herbivores here, what you tend to get is fewer and fewer organisms at these higher trophic levels, and they tend to get larger. Predators tend to be bigger than the things that they actually feed upon. This is a so-called Eltonian pyramid of numbers, named after Elton, who documented this and kind of systematized these particular patterns. And you can see this in aquatic systems, you see it in terrestrial systems, and so on. So the question is, why is it that there seems to be these limitations like this? Why aren't there just as many predators as there are herbivores out there? Well, Lindemann, looking at lakes, tried to describe this particular pattern, and his conclusion was that actually the reason why you get fewer and fewer organisms at these higher trophic levels is because every time that energy moves from one resource to a consumer, this is an inefficient process, that a lot of this energy is lost due to thermodynamic inefficiencies. That when 10 calories are consumed by an herbivore, really only about one of those calories gets to be assimilated into something that then could be eaten by another trophic levels. So there's just a fundamental limitation in the sloppiness of biochemical reactions. A lot of that energy is just lost in heat or in the maintenance of bodies. And this efficiency actually varies. And this is one of the reasons that there's actually energetic constraints on how many organisms can be maintained at higher trophic levels. This is the so-called trophic efficiency hypothesis. If this is true, then what you might expect is that food webs that are assembled that have organisms that are more efficient should have more trophic levels because there's just more energy to make it up to the top. And in fact, this is kind of a prediction that if you have things like higher, and therefore what you might expect is that in food webs that have a greater efficiency of transfer between the trophic levels, you would expect there to be more energy available to be transferred to higher and higher trophic levels. And so, a food web like this one here that might have trophic efficiency of 30%, so 30% of the energy makes it from one level to the next, should be able to support more trophic levels. And it also sets kind of the higher, the top limit. You just can't have too many food chain trophic levels. And in fact, food chains are rarely have more than five different rungs to them because of this trophic inefficiency that you see there. In reviews that have been done to look at this particular question, in fact, this tends to be what you see. Invertebrate food chains, that is ones that rely on insects feeding on other insects, tend to be longer than ones that are based on vertebrate food chains because insects tend to be more efficient at this trophic transfer than vertebrates are. So there's evidence for this trophic limitation, for this energetic limitation hypothesis. Another prediction is that the more energy is present at the base of the food web, even if you have inefficiencies, this amount of energy should be able to kind of percolate up. Again, this bottom-up view should be able to percolate up and give you more trophic levels. This is, you can depict this in this particular way, where if in this figure here, system productivity, you can imagine going from like a desert over here with very low production to maybe a salt marsh over here with very high production or tropical rainforest. As more and more energy becomes available for consumers to actually feed on it, what you actually should see is an increase in the number of, in the abundance of a particular trophic group. So if you have no energy, you can't even maintain a plant. If you turn the lights out and this planet has no more sun, you can't maintain plants at all. As you get into areas that have more nutrients and more resources, what you should see is an increase in the amount of plants that you have there. Species density here is kind of how much is actually there. And as this amount gets to a certain critical level, then you'll start being able to see the ability of a system to actually support an herbivore. And again, this has to do with that trophic efficiency. As herbivores start to become more common because system productivity is now high enough, these herbivores should exert some control over the plants that they're feeding on. And that's why this line becomes flat. This is one hypothesis, this consumption top-down hypothesis that now is this factor should become more important. As herbivores themselves become sufficiently common, then what you'll be able to do is start to support carnivores. So the carnivores won't show up until there's enough energy, again, to allow that third trophic level to actually exist. When carnivores start to become common enough, then herbivores should be kept under control. And the Trophic Cascade would say that now plants are free to assimilate more energy and grow. So this is an example of Trophic Cascades actually happening. This is a model, by the way, but it's energy dependent. So these trophic levels won't actually build unless you actually have enough energy in the system or enough limiting resources in the system for this to actually happen. Well, does this actually occur? Is there evidence that system productivity actually is what allows these trophic cascades to actually happen and for the number of trophic levels to actually exist? Actually, some of the best work that has been done in this particular sphere was pioneered here at the University of Wisconsin with work of Steve Carpenter and Jim Kitchell, summarized nicely in this book called The Trophic Cascade of Lakes. And what they were interested in was the understanding patterns of trophic abundance. Why is it that some lakes are actually green and have lots of algae growing in them, while other lakes seem to be clear? And to make a long and very interesting story somewhat shorter, in lakes that actually had a lot of what they found was that what determines the amount of the clarity of these lakes actually has to do with the presence of piscivorous fish, that is, fish that eat other fish. When there are fish that eat other fish, these zooplankton feeding fish are rare. The zooplankton are common. The zooplankton eat the algae, and therefore you have clear lakes. So in lakes that have enough resources to maintain a fourth trophic level here, you tend to get a clear state in the lake. If for whatever reason these lakes are not can't maintain these particular fish, or have had them fished out, for example, then the fish that feed on the zooplankton are going to be relatively more common. They will feed on the zooplankton, which then release the algae from actually from this consumption here, and then you have lakes that turn green. So this is a non-insect example, but there have been a lot of comparative studies that have tried to understand, how common are these trophic cascades in natural systems. And our insect-based food webs actually show these same kinds of dynamics here. And in fact, some of the work the early work in these areas that came out cast some doubt as to whether trophic cascades were actually common enough in non-aquatic systems to actually be worth even talking about. Some of the work here, you can even just see it from the titles. Are all trophic cascades wet? And is this kind of common enough in terrestrial systems to be an important dynamic? Some early studies that tried to look at this. So what people did. So one way to look at this. One way to try to understand these patterns is to look at all the studies that have actually tried to look at these phenomena and synthesize them into an overall picture. These are sometimes referred to as meta-analyses. And what you'll see, this review here by Jonathan Shuren tried to put everything together that was known at the time. And this is a little hard to understand the way they've kind of structured this, but it's very common. You'll often see this in meta-analyses, where they look at the ratio of the amount of herbivorous consumers in a situation where there is a predator compared to where there is no predator. So they look at the ratio, and actually they express it as a log. So in a log ratio, a log response ratio, when this number becomes negative, that means that the abundance of herbivores in the presence of predators is smaller than the abundance of herbivores in the absence of predators. And therefore this number becomes negative. If you just take the ratio of a fraction that is less than 1, you'll get if you take the natural log of a fraction that's less than 1, you will get a negative number. And so what this is basically saying is that when there's predators around, herbivore populations tend to become more negative. This is what you would expect under consumption. And you can also design a similar ratio here looking at plants or the resource that's available to them. If this number becomes positive, that means in the presence of predators, this ratio here, or the log of this ratio, becomes positives. So when there's predators around, you'll see an increase in plants as herbivores become negative. And this is what you would expect if trophic cascades are actually happening. In fact, this is the one-to-one line that if every removal of a unit of herbivore results in an increase in the response of a plant. And what you actually find here is that in terrestrial systems that people had studied, most of these effects are really small. When you add predators, you tend not to get a big change in the you tend not to get a big change in the herbivore population, and as a consequence, not a big change in the plant abundance. Compared to aquatic systems, where you add a predatory fish, for example, you tend to get a very big response in the algae that are provided there, and that's why people started doubting whether in terrestrial-based food webs this is actually an important pattern. There were several analyses that came out after this particular study that tried to analyze it in a little more rigorous way, including one by Oz Schmitz, and we'll hear about Oz in a later video, and these here by Mooney and Gruner. And they did a very similar meta-analysis, but looking at in more detail at the terrestrial cascades. And again, here you have the herbivore density ratio. That is, when you add predators, is there a negative effect of those predators on herbivores? And what is the response on plants here? And what you actually find is that that not all the studies are kind of hovering around zero or near zero. There's actually plenty of systems, plenty of examples where there actually are documented cases of large effects on plants when you add or remove predators. So this idea that trophic cascades are only present in aquatic systems started to kind of break down a little bit as people looked at this in more detail. So certainly evidence that predation can affect plants.